The Haelor Empire was a colossal presence in the galaxy, spanning thousands of star systems, their ships massive, and their weapons devastating. They had crushed empires before and expanded endlessly across the stars, with one primary goal: to bring every corner of space under their iron fist. Their technology was unparalleled. They had mastered energy manipulation and planet-destroying weaponry, and their fleets were a terrifying sight to any species that dared to challenge them. But in their arrogance, they overlooked one thing: they had never encountered the humans. The humans had been quietly expanding their influence in the galaxy over the past few centuries, building colonies and exploring the unknown. With a fierce determination, their technology was primitive in comparison to the Haelor, yet there was something in their nature that set them apart. They were adaptable, creative, and driven by an unyielding will to survive and thrive on the frontier of space. Their ships, though small, were fast and agile, and their crews had an uncanny ability to think outside the box in moments of crisis. The Vanguard was one of these ships, a small exploration vessel designed for deep space reconnaissance. It was equipped with the latest in human-engineered technology, but no one could have predicted what would happen when it wandered into the wrong part of space, the sector where the Haelor had already set their eyes on a planet rich in resources that they planned to harvest, with no regard for the local inhabitants. The humans were just another species to be ignored or crushed beneath the weight of their empire. The Haelor fleet arrived with devastating speed and precision, a series of warships cloaked from hyperspace, without warning, surrounding the Vanguard. In an instant, their weapons charged and ready. The flagship of the Haelor fleet, a massive dreadnought, loomed overhead, casting a shadow across the human ship. The commander of the fleet, General Zarek, watched from his command deck as his officers reported the human ship's size and configuration, clearly underestimating its potential. They had dealt with species far more advanced than these insignificant humans before, and they had been quick to crush them. The Vanguard was nothing more than a fly in the face of a storm. General Zarek issued the order to open fire, his voice cold and calculating as the energy cannons powered up the fleet's ships locked onto the Vanguard, and the first salvo of energy blasts lit up the dark expanse of space. The Haelor expected this to be a quick and easy victory. The human ship would burn and scatter into dust. But what they didn't account for was the ship's design and the resolve of the crew on board. Captain Rachel Connors stood at the helm of the Vanguard. Her eyes narrowed as she watched the flashing indicators of incoming fire. Her mind raced through calculations and simulations as the first blast struck the ship's shields, shaking the vessel but leaving it intact. She quickly barked orders to her crew, who scrambled to put the ship into evasive maneuvers. She knew the odds were slim that they would survive this encounter, but she had one thing: the Haelor didn't respect the ability to adapt in the face of the impossible, and the heart of a crew that refused to surrender even in the face of overwhelming odds. The Vanguard juked and weaved as it sped through space, its engines humming with power. The Haelor's shots missed their target by mere inches as the human ship danced around the energy beams. Captain Connors ordered a sharp turn just as another barrage of blasts came at them. His ship's inertial dampeners kicked in, and the crew felt the sharp jolt as they shifted direction at full speed with an agility that no one expected for a ship of its size. The Vanguard was not done yet, and the Haelor would soon learn just how wrong they were about humanity. Captain Rachel Connors gripped the armrests of her seat, her mind sharp and focused as she barked orders to her crew. The Vanguard was a small ship compared to the Haelor warships, but it was built for agility and speed. Its design was made to navigate through hostile environments, not to withstand direct confrontation with fleets of this size. But it was her crew's ingenuity and the ship's unconventional tech that would make the difference here. The Haelor didn't know what they were up against yet. The ship's AI, named Artemis, hummed quietly in the background as it adjusted the ship's systems in real time, using the Haelor's own attack patterns to anticipate their next move. Artemis was designed to learn from every encounter and adapt its strategies accordingly. Connors had always trusted Artemis during tight situations, but never had the AI's capabilities been more crucial than now. Incoming at 2 o'clock, Lieutenant Mark Reeves called out from his station, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. He had been Connor's first officer for years, and his unwavering confidence was a stabilizing force for the crew. He didn't need to say more. Connors already knew what was coming. Evasive maneuvers now, Connors shouted, and the Vanguard lurched to the side, just as a series of energy blasts cut through the space where the ship had been only moments before. The ship's shields flared briefly before stabilizing, but the Vanguard was still intact. The Haelor didn't know it, but they had already made their first mistake. They assumed that a single human ship in this sector would be easy prey. They assumed that humans were still primitive creatures who could be easily dominated, but the Vanguard was far from an ordinary ship. It had been designed by some of humanity's brightest minds and built to survive the harshest of conditions. The crew was no different. Each member had been trained for unexpected situations, and each person knew how to think on their feet when the rules no longer applied. Connor's eyes scanned the tactical display as another Haelor ship came into view. It was a heavy cruiser and its weapon systems were already powering up, but the Vanguard was already in motion. Artemis fed her new calculations, showing the optimal route to avoid the incoming fire and where to strike next. The human ship darted forward with an incredible burst of speed, quickly closing the distance between them and the Haelor vessel. Connors was ready. "Now," she shouted, and with that command the ship's forward weapons came to life. 2 plasma-tipped missiles streaked through the blackness of space toward the Haelor cruiser. Before the enemy even had time to react, they detonated directly against the cruiser's shield system. The blast rocked the Haelor ship, throwing it off balance for a split second, and in that instant, the Vanguard was gone once again, weaving through space to find the next target. The Haelor ships were disoriented now. Their initial attack, having failed to cripple the human ship, had shaken their confidence. Their commanders could not fathom why the Vanguard was still intact despite taking several direct hits. They began to communicate in frantic bursts, issuing orders to their fleet, trying to recalculate their strategy. Back on the Vanguard, Connors and her crew had already moved to the next phase of the battle. Their position was unknown to the Haelor, and they intended to keep it that way. "We've got them on the ropes," Lieutenant Reeves muttered as he worked the controls. "They don't know what hit them." Connors nodded, her eyes never leaving the tactical display. She knew the Haelor would soon realize that the game had changed. They weren't dealing with an inferior race anymore, and that realization would be the beginning of their downfall. The Haelor fleet was in chaos now, their once perfectly coordinated attack unraveling before their eyes. General Zarek watched in disbelief as his ships scrambled to reorganize, their strategies collapsing one after another. He had expected an easy victory, a quick annihilation of a species too primitive to fight back. But the Vanguard was no ordinary ship, and the humans aboard it were no ordinary crew. They were proving far more dangerous than he had anticipated. "Status report," Zarek demanded, his voice cold but laced with frustration. His officers scrambled to feed him information, their voices betraying the anxiety growing within the ranks. One officer, barely able to hide his panic, spoke up. "We've lost 2 cruisers, sir. The Vanguard hit them with unexpected precision. Our shields didn't hold. It's as if they know exactly where to strike." Zarek's jaw clenched. "Impossible. They're just humans. What kind of technology is this?" A voice from another officer, this one more composed, spoke up. "General, they've disappeared again. Every time we think we have a lock on them, they vanish into the void. Their evasive maneuvers are unlike anything we've encountered. It's as if their ship is a ghost." The general's brow furrowed. The Vanguard was not just evading them, it was mocking them. They had targeted the ship multiple times, throwing every weapon at it, yet it always seemed to slip out of their grasp. And now it was attacking again, this time from unexpected angles, catching their ships off guard, one by one. "Where are they now?" Zarek asked, his voice now tinged with urgency. "Coming in from our rear, General," an officer called out. "It's too fast. We're losing control of the situation." "Countermeasures. Activate every tracking system we have," Zarek barked, but it was already too late. The Vanguard had already launched another barrage, this time targeting a massive Haelor frigate. The missiles connected with pinpoint accuracy, overwhelming the frigate's shields in seconds. The ship shuddered under the impact before its reactor exploded, sending debris scattering across space. Zarek's face tightened with rage. He couldn't comprehend what was happening. The Vanguard was a ship that should have been no threat. But here it was, dismantling his fleet, destroying his forces with uncanny precision. The humans were playing a game, but Zarek was only now realizing that the rules had changed. His fleet wasn't simply being outmatched, it was being outthought. He turned to his tactical officers. How is it possible that a human ship is outmaneuvering us like this? What's their secret? One officer hesitated, then spoke with hesitation. General, it's not just their ship. It's the way they're thinking. We've been attacking them using conventional strategies, and they're countering us by using unconventional tactics. They're not just avoiding our weapons, they're predicting our moves. Zarek stood in silence for a long moment, processing the words. It was true. The humans weren't just surviving. They were adapting in real time. The Vanguard's crew wasn't merely reacting to the Haelor's attacks. They were staying one step ahead, anticipating every move and exploiting every weakness in the Haelor's battle tactics. The humans weren't afraid. They were learning from the fight, and in that moment, Zarek knew that the Haelor had made a catastrophic mistake underestimating them. "Ready the secondary fleet," Zarek said, his voice cold with new resolve. "We'll crush them now. No more games." But deep down, he knew it wouldn't be as simple as that. The Vanguard had already proven its worth, and the humans aboard it had proven their cunning. This battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. Tension in the Haelor command center was palpable as General Zarek steeled himself for the next phase of the battle. The Vanguard was proving to be a far more formidable opponent than he could have ever imagined, and the fact that it was still alive after everything he'd thrown at it was a testament to something the Haelor had yet to understand. But Zarek had his pride, and his resolve hardened. He would not allow his empire to be humiliated by a human ship. "Prepare the secondary fleet," he ordered, voice now steady but brimming with a dark intensity. "We'll deploy the entire division. The Vanguard won't be able to dodge them all." His officers scrambled to execute the order, their nervousness barely concealed. They had watched as their best-laid plans crumbled under the brilliance of the human crew, and they now faced an uncertain future. But Zarek was resolute. This battle would end today. Meanwhile, aboard the Vanguard, Captain Connors stood at the helm, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. She had anticipated that the Haelor would attempt to overwhelm them with sheer numbers. It was what they did best, but she had no intention of giving them the satisfaction of an easy victory. "Lieutenant Reeves, prepare for evasive maneuvers," Connors said, her voice calm but sharp with focus. "We need to be ready for a larger engagement. If they think they can outnumber us, they're about to learn the cost of underestimating human tactics." Reeves nodded, adjusting his station. "Aye, Captain. We're ready to move when you are." The crew of the Vanguard had adapted to the chaotic rhythm of battle. Their movements were fluid, a seamless synchronization that came from years of training and the shared bond of survival. It wasn't just the ship's advanced technology that made them capable of standing their ground. It was their sheer will to win, their instinct to outthink the enemy, and their refusal to back down, no matter the odds. As the Haelor fleet regrouped, Connors could sense the shift in their tactics. The enemy was more focused now, less scattered. They had stopped throwing random blasts at the Vanguard and were beginning to predict their movements. The time for avoiding confrontation was coming to an end. The Vanguard would need to strike, but the question was when and where. "Artemis, give me the optimal engagement points," Connors commanded, her fingers dancing over the console. The AI system hummed to life, scanning the Haelor fleet and calculating potential weaknesses in their formation. "Analyzing. Optimal strike points identified," Artemis responded. "The rear shields of the flagship are down to 32%. The frigates to the left are vulnerable to a focused assault." Connors' lips curled into a tight smile. "Perfect. Let's make them regret that calculation. Without hesitation, she issued the command. Reeves, take us in. Full speed toward the flagship. Prepare to launch a concentrated missile strike. The Vanguard surged forward, its engines roaring as it darted through the stars with breathtaking speed. The Haelor fleet was still trying to realign, and in that precious moment, the human ship took advantage of their disarray. The Vanguard's missiles locked onto their target, streaking through the void with precision. The first explosion rocked the Haelor flagship, followed by a cascade of fire as the ship's rear shields collapsed. The massive vessel staggered, throwing off the formation of the Haelor fleet, but Connors wasn't finished yet. Reeves, hard left, she ordered, and the Vanguard swerved, narrowly avoiding a counterattack from a nearby cruiser. The human ship moved like a serpent, swift and unpredictable, as it found its next target in a Haelor frigate on the far side of the battlefield. The frigate never saw the Vanguard coming. A second wave of missiles hit their mark, detonating with such force that the frigate's engines erupted in a blaze of destruction. The Vanguard danced away, weaving through the wreckage, its crew already preparing for the next strike. On the Haelor command ship, panic began to set in. Zarek watched in disbelief as his fleet's cohesion faltered. His officers tried to reassure him, but their voices lacked conviction. They had underestimated the humans, and now they were paying the price. "Get me those secondary ships," Zarek demanded, his voice losing its earlier composure. "We need to crush them, now." But Connors and her crew had already anticipated this move. The Vanguard was a ship of quick strikes, not prolonged battles, and each time the Haelor adapted, the human ship responded faster and smarter. The game was changing, and the Haelor were losing. The Haelor fleet was beginning to splinter. Their once imposing formation was now little more than a disjointed collection of ships, each struggling to cope with the relentless onslaught from the Vanguard. General Zarek paced furiously within the command center of his flagship, his mind racing through every possible tactic, yet no solution seemed to present itself. The humans had learned from every engagement, adapted faster than he could have predicted, and now they were exploiting every vulnerability in his fleet. "Sir, the flagship is reporting another breach in the starboard hull," one of his officers said, voice trembling. "And we've lost 2 more cruisers. The Vanguard. It's like it knows our next move before we do." Zarek clenched his fists, his frustration turning to rage. "No, this cannot be happening. A human ship, outmaneuvering us like this. How is it possible?" His officers exchanged nervous glances, unsure how to answer. They had thrown everything at the Vanguard: energy blasts, specialized weaponry, even a coordinated fleet-wide assault. But the ship had dodged, countered, and retaliated with an uncanny ability to predict their actions. They were no longer facing a conventional battle. They were in a war of wits, and the Haelor were losing. Meanwhile, aboard the Vanguard, Captain Connors remained calm, her every decision a measured response to the enemy's increasingly erratic moves. The Haelor were rattled, their fleet in disarray, and now it was time to strike. She had been waiting for this moment, the moment when her adversaries would underestimate her crew's ability to keep pushing the advantage. "Lieutenant Reeves, prepare for Phase 2, Connors said, her eyes locked onto the chaotic Haelor fleet displayed on the holoscreen. "We're going to hit them where it hurts." Reeves nodded, his fingers flying over the controls as the Vanguard surged forward. They were no longer merely defending themselves or evading attacks. They were going on the offensive. Connors had waited for the Haelor to scatter and lose their sense of unity. It was now the perfect moment to strike at their leadership, to cut the head off the snake and throw the rest into disarray. "Artemis, pinpoint the Haelor flagship's vulnerabilities," Connors commanded. "I want everything we've got aimed at their command deck." "Analyzing now, Captain," Artemis replied, its voice as cool as ever. "Weak spots identified. Direct hit to the bridge area could incapacitate their command structure. Recommend high-energy missile strike." Connors felt a surge of determination. This was the moment that would break the Haelor's resolve. If they lost their flagship, the rest of the fleet would have no choice but to retreat or surrender. Fire! Connors barked. The Vanguard's missile systems roared to life, launching a rapid salvo toward the Haelor flagship. The missiles streaked through space, cutting through the void like a storm of fire and steel. The Haelor flagship, still reeling from the earlier damage, failed to respond in time. As the missiles slammed into its side, a massive explosion erupted, shaking the entire fleet. The flagship lurched, its shields failing under the pressure, and the Haelor flagship began to list dangerously, its command center ablaze. Zarek's voice shook with fury as he watched the destruction unfold. "No, not my flagship." He turned to his officers, his face contorted in anger. "Full retreat. We're pulling back now." But the damage had already been done. The flagship was a wreck, and without its command center, the Haelor fleet was lost. The remaining ships, disoriented and demoralized, began to panic. Orders were scrambled, fleets fractured, and the once powerful Haelor armada began to fall apart. Connors watched as the Haelor fleet broke formation, their ships scattering in every direction, trying desperately to escape the chaos that had been unleashed upon them. The Vanguard had won the battle, but Connors knew this was only the beginning of the ripple effect. News of this defeat would spread like wildfire across the galaxy, and it would change the perception of humanity forever. "Good work, everyone," Connors said, her voice a rare moment of warmth amid the tension. "Now let's make sure we finish this properly. They won't be able to come back from this." The crew of the Vanguard cheered quietly, but there was no time for celebration. The battle was still on, and there was still work to be done. With the Haelor's flagship crippled and their fleet scattered, Connors knew the war was far from over. But for now, humanity had made its mark, and the galaxy would never look at them the same way again. The Haelor fleet was in full retreat, their ships scattering in every direction, trying to escape the devastating firepower of the Vanguard. The once mighty armada had been reduced to a disjointed group of ships, crippled and lost without leadership. General Zarek's flagship was nothing more than a floating husk, its command deck completely destroyed in the blast. It was a devastating blow, not just to the Haelor fleet, but to their pride. For the first time in centuries, they were on the losing side of a battle, and it was a human ship that had brought them to their knees. Captain Connors stood at the helm, watching the Haelor ships retreat into the distance. Her heart raced, but she kept her composure. The victory was hard-earned, but it wasn't over yet. She knew the Haelor would regroup and strike again. They were a relentless empire, used to dominating their foes. But today, they had learned that humanity was not to be underestimated. "Status report, Lieutenant Reeves," Connors asked, her voice calm but intense. Reeves glanced at the tactical display before answering. "We've taken some damage, Captain, but nothing we can't handle. Shields are at 70%, and the engines are holding steady. We've lost a few external sensors, but overall, we're good to go." "Good," Connors replied, her eyes scanning the battlefield. "Keep monitoring the Haelor fleet. They'll be back. I don't expect them to run off into the stars without a plan." "I'll keep an eye on them, Captain," Reeves affirmed. "But they're scattering in all directions. They're clearly in disarray. It'll take them time to reorganize." Connors nodded. Time was something they didn't have much of. The Haelor were down, but they were not out. If she knew anything about their empire, it was that they would regroup quickly and strike back with overwhelming force. She had to prepare the Vanguard and its crew for the next wave. "Artemis, track the retreating Haelor ships. We need to know where they're heading," Connors commanded. The ship's AI responded promptly. "Tracking now, Captain. Several ships have entered nearby asteroid fields, likely to make repairs. One ship is heading for a nearby system. It's moving at high speed, likely to regroup with a larger Haelor fleet." "That's our next target," Connors said, her voice firm. "We can't let them regroup. We'll hit them hard before they can form up again." Reeves looked at her, a hint of concern in his eyes. "Captain, We're outnumbered. They got reinforcements on the way. Are you sure we can take them on in our current condition? Connors met his gaze. She could see the worry in his eyes, but she knew what needed to be done. We don't have a choice. We hit them now, while they're scattered, and we keep them from getting back into formation. If we give them time to regroup, we'll be facing a much stronger force. The crew was silent for a moment, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Then, as one, they nodded. There was no hesitation in their movements. The Vanguard had proven its strength, and its crew had proven their resolve. They would fight until the end. Connors turned back to the tactical display, her eyes narrowing. The Haelor fleet was vulnerable, and this was the moment to strike. She knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be more danger, more uncertainty, but humanity had shown the galaxy that they were capable of so much more than anyone had ever believed. Prepare for a jump to the nearby system, Connors said, her voice resolute. We're going after them. Reeves began entering the coordinates, his fingers flying over the console. Aye, Captain. Jump in 3, 2, 1. The Vanguard lurched forward as it entered hyperspace, leaving the broken Haelor fleet behind. Ahead of them lay the unknown, but Connors knew one thing for certain. The fight was far from over, and humanity was ready for whatever came next. The Haelor had made a catastrophic mistake by underestimating the human spirit, and now they would learn just how dangerous that mistake had been. The Vanguard emerged from hyperspace into the quiet of a new star system, its engines humming with the energy of the jump. The crew wasted no time. Connors immediately took her position at the helm, eyes scanning the tactical display as the system unfolded before her. This was the system where the Haelor ship had fled, and she had no intention of letting it regroup or escape. The moment they arrived, the Vanguard was already locking onto their target. Artemis, locate the Haelor vessel we tracked, Connors ordered, her voice steady, betraying no hint of the tension she felt in her gut. Locating now, Captain. The target is in orbit around the 4th planet in this system. It appears to be in the midst of a repair operation. Artemis responded. Good. Reeves, bring us in at full speed. No hesitation, Connors said, her gaze fixed forward. The Vanguard sped through the void, its sleek design cutting through space with effortless precision. Connors' thoughts raced. The Haelor had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt and fight back, but now they were giving her the opportunity to press the advantage. The ship they were after was wounded and vulnerable, surrounded by nothing but their own pride and arrogance. It was time to finish what they had started. Captain, we're closing in on the target. They're not responding to our hails, Lieutenant Reeves said, his voice calm, but with a hint of anticipation. Not surprising, Connors muttered. The Haelor had learned nothing. They were still too proud to acknowledge that their defeat was inevitable. This was exactly what Connors wanted, an enemy that refused to see its impending doom. The Vanguard slid into position just outside the Haelor ship's orbit, positioning itself behind a crippled vessel. The Haelor ship, a heavily damaged cruiser, floated motionless in space, with large sections of its hull still smoking from their earlier assault. It was clear that they were still in the midst of repairs, the crew likely too preoccupied to notice the human ship closing in. Artemis, fire up our weapons systems. I want everything ready to go, Connors said, her voice now laced with the gravity of what was to come. The Vanguard's engines thrummed with power as the weapons systems activated, ready for the strike. Reeves's fingers flew across the console, and a soft beep echoed in the command center. Weapons primed and locked onto the target. Ready when you are, Captain. Connors gave a sharp nod. Fire when ready. The Vanguard unleashed its payload with deadly accuracy. Missiles streaked through space, their targets locked on to the weak points of the Haelor cruiser. The Vanguard's barrage ripped into the enemy ship's already crippled hull, tearing open sections of its exterior. The cruiser shook violently, its outer defense grid flaring briefly before collapsing completely under the onslaught. On board the Haelor cruiser, panic erupted. Crew members scrambled to restore power, but they were already too late. The Vanguard had struck decisively, taking advantage of the vulnerability they had carefully studied. This wasn't just a retaliation. It was the destruction of a wounded enemy that thought it could escape the consequences of its actions. Direct hit on the bridge, Artemis reported, calm as ever. The command structure of the Haelor cruiser is now offline. We have disrupted their ability to coordinate. Good, Connor said, her expression hardening. She knew this was it. With the bridge disabled, the Haelor cruiser was no longer a coordinated threat. The remaining Haelor ships scattered throughout the system were now leaderless, disoriented, and too far from reinforcements to mount a successful counterattack. Reeves spoke up again, his voice unwavering. Captain, they're sending out distress signals. Their fleet is still in disarray. They're trying to regroup, but it's not going to be fast enough. Let them, Connors replied coolly. The damage is already done. This ship, this fleet, whatever comes after this, won't be able to pose a real threat to us. The reality of their situation was clear to her. The Haelor had underestimated humanity from the beginning, dismissing them as nothing more than an insignificant species. Now, the empire that had once ruled with iron fists was crumbling before them. The Vanguard had become a symbol of humanity's resilience, its determination to defy the odds and emerge victorious. Commander, we've got incoming reinforcements, Reeves said, his eyes narrowing on the new ships entering the system. They're heading straight for us, Captain. Connors smiled faintly. The battle was not yet won, but the final blow was close. Let them come. We'll finish this on our terms. With the Haelor on the ropes, it was only a matter of time before humanity's victory was sealed. The galaxy would know that it was no longer a playground for the Haelor Empire. They had awakened something far fiercer than they could have ever imagined. The incoming Haelor reinforcements were fast approaching, but Captain Connors wasn't concerned. They were too late. The Vanguard had already secured a decisive advantage, and she knew there was no way the scattered Haelor forces could recover in time. But this last push, the final confrontation, would be the true test of their victory. Connor's voice rang out across the bridge with unshakable resolve. Reeves, prepare for a tactical assault. We'll engage the first wave head-on and keep them off balance. Artemis, calculate optimal firing angles. We'll need precision strikes. Reeves nodded, quickly working to adjust the ship's position while monitoring the incoming Haelor ships. Aye, Captain. We're in position. The lead ship in the reinforcement wave is a heavy cruiser, but it's slower than the others. We should be able to outmaneuver it. Perfect, Connors said, her eyes never leaving the tactical display. Let's give them a reminder of who they're up against. The Vanguard powered forward with incredible speed, cutting through the stars as it locked onto the lead cruiser. The Haelor ships, now seeing their target, began to fire, their energy blasts lighting up the darkness of space. But Connors was already 2 steps ahead. As the first energy bolt from the enemy ship came toward them, she barked the order. Artemis, divert power to the shields. Evasive action now. The Vanguard lurched to the left, narrowly avoiding the energy beam, while the shields flared brightly as they absorbed the energy from the second blast. The Haelor were predictable, Connors knew. They relied on overwhelming force, a tactic that worked in their favor against less skilled opponents, but they had never fought anyone like humanity before. Lieutenant, full power to the forward weapons. Prepare for a strike, Connors commanded, a sharp glint of determination in her eyes. Reeves complied, his fingers flying over the controls as the Vanguard came in at an angle, closing the distance between them and the Haelor cruiser. The Haelor ship fired again, but this time Connors was ready. She saw the trajectory of the blast and gave her next order with flawless precision. Now, she shouted. The Vanguard unleashed a concentrated barrage of plasma missiles, striking the Haelor cruiser in rapid succession. The first hit destabilized the cruiser's shields, the second smashed into the hull, and the third obliterated the reactor core. The cruiser's engines flared, and then, With a final, deafening explosion, it disintegrated into a cloud of debris. The crew of the Vanguard cheered as the first Haelor ship was taken out of the fight. Connors didn't allow herself to smile. She knew the battle wasn't over. As expected, the other Haelor ships were closing in fast, trying to regroup in an effort to retaliate. Artemis, calculate next strike. What's the weakest ship in the remaining fleet? Connors asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline pulsing through her veins. Calculating, Artemis responded. The second cruiser in the reinforcement wave is critically damaged from earlier skirmishes. It is vulnerable to a direct strike to its port side. Connors nodded. Take it out. The Vanguard sped toward the next target, weaving through incoming fire as the Haelor desperately tried to intercept them. The Vanguard's engines screamed with power as it pushed forward. In mere seconds, they closed in on the wounded cruiser. The ship's shields were failing, and Connors gave the command just as the ship was about to fire on them. Now, Reeves. Full weapons release. Another barrage of missiles shot forward, striking the cruiser in its weakened side. The ship buckled under the attack, its hull crumpling like paper before the explosion erupted in a blinding flash. 2 down, and the Haelor were losing their grip on the fight. The remaining Haelor ships hesitated, their commanders unsure of how to respond. They had been expecting an easy victory, but they had faced the unexpected. A small, agile human ship that had outmaneuvered them, outfought them, and now destroyed them. Connors felt the battle's momentum shifting in their favor, but she wasn't about to give the Haelor a chance to regroup. Reeves, keep us in motion. No stops. No pauses, Connors said. We finish this now. The Vanguard surged forward once again, weapons locked and ready. The remaining Haelor ships, scattered and vulnerable, were easy targets. The crew of the Vanguard pressed on, relentless, unwilling to let their hard-won victory slip through their fingers. One by one, the Haelor ships fell, their shields collapsing, their crews scrambling as their ships disintegrated under the assault. The final moments of the battle were almost anticlimactic, the Haelor fleet broken and disorganized, unable to put up any real resistance. And then it was over. The remaining Haelor ships, no longer a threat, fled the system, their resolve shattered. Connors stood silently for a moment, her eyes scanning the now empty battlefield. Her crew had done the impossible. The Vanguard had delivered a blow that would resonate across the galaxy. The Haelor Empire, once thought to be an unstoppable force, had been outclassed by humanity. We did it, Reeves said, breaking the silence, his voice tinged with awe. Connors finally allowed herself a smile, the weight of their victory settling in. Yes, we did. The Vanguard's engines hummed softly as it floated amidst the debris, and for the first time in a long while, humanity had proven that they were not just survivors. They were a force to be reckoned with.